The 2000s decade for the Baltimore Orioles was a frustrating one. After making back-to-back ALCS appearances in 1996 and 1997, the team started to kind of falter a little bit after underwhelming 98-99 seasons and really bad seasons in 2000 and 2001. It was pretty inevitable that the Orioles were entering a rebuild as Mike Mussina was traded away and their payroll started going significantly down. But in 2004, GM Mike Flanagan decided it's time to get this team to compete again. And the Orioles, to their credit, made some moves. They brought back Rafael Palmeiro in free agency. They were able to get 17-game winner Cindy Ponson back after they had traded him middle of the year to the San Francisco Giants and then reeled him back in with free agency. They got 40-homer catcher Javi Lopez. And I think the big deal was that the Orioles were able to snag the big-name free agent 2002 MLB MVP Miguel Tejada over from Oakland.
If you think I'm here to play around with y'all, God damn it, I'm not.
Now, this Orioles season was another losing season, but it's 78-84 and a third-place finish in the AL East. It kind of gave fans hope that maybe things are starting to turn around, because, you know, it wasn't necessarily supposed to be a great year per se, but now is when you can start talking, maybe we can make the playoffs.
Don't talk about it. Playoffs?
If we, you know, start to add a little bit more. One of the main things I think the Orioles needed was pitching, as Ponson regressed from his 17-win season, and they had a guy like Rodrigo Lopez on the roster who was good, but not necessarily your full ace material. However, the only major moves in the 2005 offseason that the Orioles made was bringing back B.J. Surhoff, who was 40 years old at this point, to be a bench piece, and the big one, which was they traded Jerry Hairston Jr. and Mike Fontenot to the Chicago Cubs for Sammy Sosa.
Why the fuck you lying?
Yeah, most people don't even remember Sammy Sosa was on the Orioles, but he was, and you'll see why people forgot about it very quickly. But when you look at the lineup set to go in 2005 with Javi Lopez, Rafael Palmeiro, Miguel Tejada, Melvin Mora, Sammy Sosa, even Jay Gibbons, who could smack the ball around, and a young up-and-coming second baseman named Brian Roberts, who would make his first All-Star game this year, this Oriole offense was looking to be one that you did not want to mess with. And for a while, it looked that way. The Orioles were meshing together offensively, doing their thing, and they had a 7-game win streak in April that put the team at 17-7 at one point, rolling. Rolling. They even got to 14 games over 500 when they were 42-28, but then they hit a snag. They would lose 12 of 17 heading into the All-Star game, being 47-40, but still in a competitive spot coming out of it. But in the second half, the Orioles would, well, falter very badly. The lack of pitching started taking its toll on the team, and the final record for the Orioles would be 74-88. So, really, what went down? How did the Orioles go from, oh, first place contender to all of a sudden last place in the AL East? Well, things didn't necessarily go the way they wanted them to go. First of all, not addressing the pitching in the offseason, especially in the starting rotation, was one of the reasons for their downfalls. Their most consistent pitcher on the year was Bruce Chen, who went 13-10 with an ERA of 3.83. And yeah, young Eric Bedard came in and went 6-8 with a 4 ERA, but he was still, you know, trying to find his stride. And yeah, the ace Rodrigo Lopez did win 15 games, but he had an ERA close to 5 and had very inconsistent outings. And Cindy Ponson, the guy who won 17 games just 2 years ago, had an ERA of 6.5, and that was pretty much the end of his time in Baltimore. Even the bullpen wasn't all that spectacular, as B.J. Ryan was an all-star, 2.43 ERA, 36 saves. He struck out 100 batters in 70 and a third innings. He was one of the best relievers at the time. And the only other one worth mentioning was 34-year-old Todd Williams, who had a 3.30 ERA in 72 games with Baltimore. Everybody else just kind of was in and out. And a young Chris Ray did come up too and did pretty well, but outside of that, you know, nobody really knew what we were going to get out of him going forward. But what about that lineup? That lineup that was supposed to be unstoppable and strong. I mean, surely there had to be bright spots, and I mean, yeah, there was. Brian Roberts hit .314 with a career-high 18 homers, 27 stolen bases, made his first All-Star game. Miguel Tejada, in his second year with the Orioles, played in every single game, hit .304 with 26 homers and 98 RBIs. Melvin Mora hit .283 with 27 homers, 88 RBIs, made his second All-Star game. And even the designated hitter, Jay Gibbons, in 139 games, cracked 26 homers with 79 RBIs and a .277 batting average. Those were the main hitters. But when you see what was going on with the underwhelming players, then it kind of makes you realize, oh, this is why the Orioles failed. At 34 years old, Javi Lopez started to decline, as just 2 years after his 43-homer season, he fell to 15 with the Orioles. And Sammy Sosa, well, Sammy Sosa wasn't particularly great this year. In 102 games with the Orioles, Sammy Sosa hit just 14 homers, 45 RBIs, and hit .221, and would pretty much be out of the league after that. He would take a hiatus in 06, before coming back and being the designated hitter with the Texas Rangers in 2007, where he would actually clobber 21 homers and play pretty well, and then officially retire after that season. Now, what went wrong with Sammy Sosa on the Orioles? No one really knows. I mean, you gotta look at this point. He had really only played his whole career mainly in Chicago with the Cubs and then early with the White Sox. So maybe it was just that change of scenery and not being used to whatever. Or maybe it could have been something completely different that took one of the Orioles that we haven't mentioned yet into a tailspin. So in 2005, the MLB started to crack down on steroid users with suspensions, testing that, you know, they were still definitely trying to figure out, but they were starting to punish players who were caught using steroids. And one of those players in the mix was first baseman Rafael Palmeiro, who just months earlier in court declined that he had used any steroids of any kind.
Let me start by telling you this. I have never used steroids today.
But wouldn't you know it, he was one of the ones that tested positive during this whole investigation. Now, his season was alright for age 40. I mean, he hit .266 with 18 homers, 60 RBIs. He was still playing at a pretty solid level. But then he got that suspension, and even after he came back from it, he was still dealing with an ailing injury, and he went 2 for his last 26, and then he never played in the big leagues again after the Orioles said, look, get over that injury, it's affecting you too much, can't have you in the lineup right now. And now Rafael Palmeiro is synonymous with, you know, being one of the early people that they caught doing the steroids. And of course, Sammy Sosa was as well, maybe later down the line, but, you know, those two on the same team when that investigation was going on just kind of seems a little fishy to me. One thing I also forgot to mention that probably played a big part in this was after finishing 9-28 in his last 37 games as Orioles manager, Lee Mazzilli got fired and they hired Sam Perlazzo, who would later go from interim manager to full-time manager. And when you're switching managers in between the year and you're competing, that can definitely play a part in your failure or your success, because there's also been some interesting examples of times when managers were fired middle of the year only to be replaced by somebody else and that team succeeds. But for the 2005 Orioles, that was not the case. So overall, I think the Orioles' lack of moves in the offseason that they had decided to do the year prior going into this year was kind of what hurt them, where in 2004 they're like, we're all in, and this led to a lot of scrutiny with Mike Flanagan, who was an Oriole legend himself, pitching on a couple of pennant-winning teams, including the 1983 World Series team, to where he would stick around for a couple more seasons until resigning in 2007, and the Orioles bringing in Andy MacPhail to officially start that era, which, like his last name, was definitely a fail. And this would be the last time that the Orioles would win 74 or more games in a season until that infamous 2012 playoff season when the Orioles broke their streak of 13 consecutive winless seasons and 13 consecutive playoffless seasons, which, don't worry, I plan on making a video about that team as I followed them very thoroughly. And the 2005 Orioles are known for being a team that was well in first place for most of the first half of the season and would go from first to worst within pretty much half of a season in general. Now, I didn't start watching baseball till a year after this, so this 2005 team isn't like fresh in my head. But for those of you that did watch baseball around this time and were fans of the Orioles and following the Orioles, I'd really like to hear in the comments below what you have to say, because, you know, I wasn't quite into baseball yet. And like I said, my first interaction with the Orioles, obviously with my family being from Baltimore, was in 2006 when the Orioles weren't much better. But, you know, sometimes you're just fans of those teams that don't really do well until, you know, you get older in life. And now at 26 years old, I've seen them make it the playoffs 4 times, win 2 division titles, and now they're a serious World Series contender for the first time in my life. So I guess sometimes patience is a virtue. But that's it for me. Stay safe out there, and I will catch you all in the next one.